A 6-year-old girl refused to sit down at school. When her teacher asked why, the child's answer was so disturbing it brought the teacher to tears. Moments later, a simple drawing would spark a 911 call and a shocking investigation. The story you are about to hear begins in a place that feels safe to most of us, an ordinary school classroom on an ordinary morning. But within just a few short minutes, that classroom would turn into the center of a police investigation. A teacher would be reduced to tears, and a little girl's words would set off alarms that could not be ignored. It was the kind of morning you've probably experienced yourself. The sun was up, the day was new, and Pinewood Elementary School buzzed with the usual chatter of children arriving for another week of learning. Backpacks were dropped onto desks, friends swapped stories about their weekends, and the faint hum of excitement filled the air. Everything looked normal, everything looked safe. Inside one bright, colorful classroom, Mrs. Olivia Henderson prepared for her day. She wasn't just any teacher. She was the kind who carried a warmth about her, a calm presence that made nervous children relax and shy students feel like they belonged. She had been teaching for over 15 years, long enough to recognize when something wasn't right with a child. She always paid attention. She always noticed the small details. And that morning, one small detail nearly broke her heart. As the children slid into their seats, chatting and giggling about pets, games, and family trips, one little girl stood apart. 6-year-old Emily Taylor. She didn't sit. She didn't chatter. Instead, she stood beside her desk, clutching her backpack tightly against her chest, as though it were a shield against the world. Mrs. Henderson smiled at her gently, the way she always did. "Emily, sweetheart, you can take your seat now." But Emily didn't move. She shook her head, her blonde pigtails swaying, her blue eyes filling with tears. She clutched the backpack tighter, as though sitting down was something impossible. The kiss-tea classroom carried on around her, other children flipping through their books, eager hands shooting up to share stories about their weekends. But Mrs. Henderson's attention was locked on the small girl who whispered words that sent a chill straight through her. "I can't," Emily said, barely audible. Mrs. Henderson bent down so her voice wouldn't carry to the rest of the class. "Are you feeling sick, honey?" Emily's bottom lip quivered, tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head again. Her voice trembled as she finally admitted something that made the teacher's stomach tighten. "It hurts to sit." For a split second, Mrs. Henderson froze. She had seen children fake stomach aches to avoid math tests. She had seen them claim sore throats to dodge gym class. But this was different. The look on Emily's face wasn't one of mischief or stalling. It was fear. She tried again, more gently. "Sweetheart, would you like to go see the nurse?" Another headshake, this time more frantic. Emily's small shoulders trembled as though she was fighting against words she didn't know how to explain. And then, in a whisper so soft Mrs. Henderson almost missed it, Emily said something that made the teacher's blood run cold. It was big and thick, and it scared me. Mrs. Henderson's breath caught in her throat. What could a child mean by that? What could make a 6-year-old describe something in such a way? Her instincts screamed that something was wrong, very, very wrong. And she had learned long ago to never ignore those instincts. Keeping her composure in front of the other students, she assigned one of the older children to lead the class in reading, while she guided Emily gently to the quiet reading corner. She reached for a blank sheet of paper and some crayons, hoping this would give the child a safer way to explain. "Emily," she said softly, sliding the paper across the little table, "can you draw it for me? Can you draw what scared you?" At first, Emily hesitated. Her small hands trembled as she picked up a crayon. Then, slowly, with halting strokes, she began to draw. Mrs. Henderson watched as colors and lines filled the page, each shape making her stomach twist tighter. When Emily finally pushed the paper forward, Mrs. Henderson looked down and felt the world tilt. The crude drawing, childlike and simple, showed something no 6-year-old should ever have to draw. Something that made her hand fly to her mouth, her eyes sting with tears. This wasn't the innocent doodle of a child. This was a desperate cry. For help, she looked at Emily, who whispered the single word again. Sunday. Her heart pounded in her chest. Whatever had happened to this little girl yesterday had terrified her so deeply that she couldn't sit, couldn't speak it, could only draw it. Mrs. Henderson forced her voice to remain steady as she excused herself to the classroom phone. Her fingers shook as she dialed. When the principal answered, she didn't waste a single second. This is Olivia Henderson. Call 911 immediately and contact Emily Taylor's mother. It's an emergency. As she hung up, the sound of distant sirens already wailed through the streets, growing louder with each passing second. And in that moment, Mrs. Henderson made a silent promise. Whatever had happened to Emily would not go unanswered. What could a child have drawn that was so disturbing? What could have happened on Sunday that left her unable to sit down? Those questions would soon shake not just the school, but the entire community. The teacher's heart raced as she sat beside Emily in the quiet corner of the classroom. The rest of the children flipped pages in their books, unaware that just a few feet away, their classmate was trembling, clutching a crayon like it was her last way to be heard. Emily's small hand pressed down hard on the paper. She wasn't doodling flowers or stick figures the way most children her age would. She was deliberate, slow, almost afraid of what she was putting onto the page. Each line seemed heavy, as though it carried more weight than her 6-year-old shoulders could. Bare! When she was finished, she slid the paper across the desk with trembling fingers. Her wide, tear-filled eyes avoided her teacher's. She didn't want to see the reaction. She didn't want to relive what she had just drawn. Mrs. Henderson looked down, her breath caught in her throat. The image wasn't detailed, not in the way an adult might draw something. But sometimes, children's simplicity made things even more disturbing. The drawing showed a large shape, towering, with a long extension that seemed almost alive. Crude lines, yes, but the implication, the way Emily had described it as big and thick and scary, made Mrs. Henderson's stomach twist in fear. She pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle the gasp, threatening to escape. She knew, with a clarity that chilled her to the bone, that this was not something she could brush aside. Children sometimes exaggerated. They sometimes confused nightmares with real life. But this was different. This looked like a warning. Her instincts screamed at her. She needed to act now. Emily, she whispered gently, trying to keep her own voice steady. Who showed you this? Who made you see this? The little girl's lip trembled. She hugged herself tightly and whispered one single word. Sunday. Mrs. Henderson froze. Sunday. Yesterday. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She glanced back toward the class. 20 pairs of eyes were still glued to their books, oblivious to the storm that had just erupted in the corner of their classroom. She couldn't scare them. She couldn't let them know something was wrong. Not yet. Class, she called out, forcing her voice into a cheerful tone that betrayed nothing of the fear gnawing at her insides. Please keep reading. Madison, you're in charge until I get back. And then she turned back to Emily. Stay right here, sweetheart. I'll be back in a moment. She strode to the phone on the wall, her hand trembling as she dialed. The moment the principal answered, her composure cracked. This is Olivia Henderson. I need you to call 911 immediately and contact Emily Taylor's mother. It's an emergency. Her voice broke on the last word. When she hung up the phone, she felt the weight of what she had just done. She had made the call that no teacher ever wants to make. The call that meant whatever was happening was bigger than her, bigger than the classroom, bigger than the school, and outside, in the distance, she could already hear it. The faint but growing wail of sirens. Within minutes, police cars would pull up in front of Pinewood Elementary. Officers would step inside, and the quiet little classroom, decorated with colorful bulletin boards and children's drawings, would become the site of a full-scale investigation. But before any of that, Mrs. Henderson stood frozen in place, her hand still hovering near. The phone, staring back at Emily. The child's face was wet with tears, her small body shaking, and Mrs. Henderson made a silent vow. She would not let this girl's cry for help be ignored. Whatever had happened on Sunday, whatever had left. Emily, terrified of sitting down and drawing things no child should draw, would soon come to light. The sirens grew louder. What had started as a perfectly ordinary school day was now unraveling into something no one could ignore. Parents pulling into the circular driveway to drop off their children slowed down, their eyes widening as two police cruisers rolled to a stop in front of the school. Moments later, a silver sedan bearing the emblem of Child Protective Services pulled up behind them. Inside, Mrs. Henderson's classroom remained outwardly calm, the students obediently flipping through their reading books. But in the principal's office, a different atmosphere was building, one of urgency, fear, and unanswered questions. The first to step inside was Officer James Daniels. At 42, with broad shoulders and sharp eyes, he carried himself with the kind of authority that silenced a room. 15 years in law enforcement, the last 5 devoted entirely to cases involving children, had given him both a hardened exterior and a soft core of compassion. He knew how to read the smallest details, and he knew when something was wrong. Beside him walked his younger partner, Officer Rivera, eager but serious, taking mental notes on every word spoken. The school secretary led them quickly down the hall. Her face was pale, her voice trembling as she said, "The principal is waiting for you. So is Mrs. Henderson. She's shaken." They entered Principal Morgan's office, and the air seemed to tighten. Mrs. Henderson was already seated, her hands trembling in her lap, her face pale but determined. The principal and the school counselor stood nearby, equally grim. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Principal Morgan said, her normally commanding voice subdued. "Emily is with the nurse right now. Mrs. Henderson can walk you through what happened." Officer Daniels nodded, his notebook ready. "Please start from the beginning." Mrs. Henderson took a deep breath. Even retelling the events made her throat tighten. "Emily refused to sit down during class. When I asked why, she said it hurt. Then she whispered something about it being big and thick, and that it scared her. I asked her to draw what she meant. She slid the sheet of paper across the desk. This is what she drew." Daniels studied it. The childish scrawl might have seemed innocent to anyone else, but he had seen enough in his career to know that sometimes the simplest drawings told the darkest stories. He kept his expression professional, but a knot tightened in his stomach. "And where is the child's mother?" he asked. "She's a nurse at Pinewood Memorial Hospital," Principal Morgan replied. "We've already contacted her. She's on her way." "What about the father?" Daniels pressed. "Deployed overseas, military." Daniels scribbled a note. His mind was already mapping the possibilities. A child in pain, a disturbing drawing, a weekend that involved someone outside the immediate household. He looked up sharply. Who was Emily with this weekend? There was silence for a moment. Finally, the counselor spoke. "We believe her uncle sometimes cares for her when her mother is at work." Daniels tapped his pen against the notebook. "We'll need to speak with him." He glanced at Rivera. "Also arrange for a child psychologist. We're not questioning her again without proper support." Before anyone could respond, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. A woman's voice, desperate and breathless, called out for directions. "That will be her mother," Principal Morgan said, rising quickly. To open the door, Sarah Taylor burst into the room in her hospital scrubs, her face drained of color, her ponytail coming loose. Her badge still clung to her chest pocket, but she looked nothing like the calm, composed nurse she was known to be. She looked like a terrified mother whose world was collapsing. "Where's my daughter?" she demanded, her voice raw, her eyes darting around the room. "What's happened to Emily?" Officer Daniels rose, softening his tone. "Miss Taylor, I'm Officer Daniels. We're doing everything we can to make sure your daughter is safe. She's with the school nurse right now, but there are some things we need to discuss." Sarah's gaze fell on the desk, on the drawing. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Her lips parted, and her hands began to shake. Did Emily draw? "That?" Her voice cracked. "What is this? What happened?" She staggered slightly, her knees threatening to give way. The principal reached for her arm, steadying her, but the fear in Sarah's eyes was uncontainable. Every mother imagines that school is a safe place, that when you kiss your child goodbye in the morning, they'll be protected until you see them again. But now Sarah faced something far worse. The possibility that her daughter had been hurt, and that no one had seen it until now. Daniels kept his voice measured, calm. "Miss Taylor, we need to ask you some questions about Emily's weekend, specifically about Sunday." Sarah blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "Sunday. She was with her uncle, Nathan. He took her and his kids to the zoo because I was working a double shift. Why? What happened?" Before Daniels could respond, Officer Rivera appeared in the doorway, holding something in his gloved hands. His expression was grim. "The backpack," he said quietly. "You're going to want to see this." The room fell silent. Sarah's eyes flicked from the backpack to the drawing to the officer's. Her chest tightened, panic clawing at her lungs. Something terrible had happened. Something she hadn't seen, hadn't stopped. And now the evidence was right there, in her daughter's trembling voice, her disturbing drawing, and a stained backpack that might hold the truth everyone was afraid to confront. The school nurse's office had never felt so heavy with silence. Emily sat on a small chair, her feet dangling, her arms wrapped tightly around her mother. Sarah held her close, trying to be strong, though her own hands trembled as she stroked her daughter's hair. Every few seconds, Emily shifted uncomfortably, wincing as she tried to adjust herself. When the nurse asked her gently what hurt, she whispered again, "It hurts to sit." Officer Daniels stood nearby, his face unreadable, but his mind racing. Beside him, Rivera carefully sealed Emily's backpack inside a large brown evidence bag, his gloved hands moving with practiced caution. The dark stain smeared across the fabric seemed to taunt everyone in the room. Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice sharp with desperation. "Somebody tell me what's happening. Why are the police here? Why are you treating my daughter like she's a victim of a crime?" Daniels chose his words carefully. "Miss Taylor, no one is making assumptions, but your daughter has given us reasons to be deeply concerned. She's in pain. She described something that frightened her. She made a drawing that alarms us. And now there's a suspicious stain on her belongings. We have to make sure she's safe." Tears spilled down Sarah's face. She looked down at Emily, who was fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, her small shoulders shaking. "Sweetheart," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Can you tell Mommy what happened? Why does it hurt?" Emily hesitated. She pointed vaguely toward her lower body, then whispered, "It's red. It stings." Sarah's face crumpled. She pulled her daughter tighter against her, guilt and fear flooding through her. She hadn't noticed anything that morning. She had sent Emily off to school like it was just another day. How could she have missed this? Daniels spoke again, more firmly this time. "Miss Taylor, we'd like Emily to be examined by a pediatric specialist. It's standard procedure in cases like this." "Cases like what?" Sarah demanded, her protective instincts flaring. "We're not making any conclusions," Daniels replied steadily. "But we need to rule things out, to protect her." Sarah's chest rose and fell as she fought for breath. She wanted to scream, to argue, to deny. But when she looked into her daughter's tear-streaked face, she knew there was no choice. "Fine," she whispered. "Take us to the hospital." Minutes later, the small convoy left Pinewood Elementary. 2 police cruisers in front, the child services sedan close behind, and Sarah's car in the middle, carrying Emily, who sat in the back seat still clutching her mother's hand. The ride felt endless. Sarah's thoughts spiraled. What if something terrible had happened on Sunday while she was at work? What if her daughter had been hurt while in her brother's care? She trusted Nathan. He adored Emily, but doubt gnawed at her now, whispering questions she couldn't bear to ask out loud. At Pinewood Children's Hospital, the halls smelled faintly of antiseptic and echoed with distant beeping monitors. Dr. Rebecca Wilson, a veteran pediatrician with kind eyes and streaks of silver in her hair, greeted them with a calm smile. "Hello, Emily. I'm Dr. Wilson. Your mom tells me you're having some discomfort." Emily nodded shyly, glancing up at Sarah for reassurance. Daniels stepped aside with Rivera, lowering his voice. "The lab is rushing analysis on the backpack stain. Early tests rule out blood. They'll let us know if it's something else." Rivera added, "We've also contacted the uncle, Nathan Taylor. He's on his way." Daniels gave a curt nod. "Good. I want to hear from him directly." Back inside the exam room, Sarah stood beside the table while Dr. Wilson examined Emily gently, speaking to her in a soothing tone. After several tense minutes, she straightened, pulling off her gloves. Her expression was serious, but there was no trace of alarm. "Miss Taylor," she said carefully, "Emily has a severe case of contact dermatitis, essentially a painful skin irritation in her groin and upper thigh area. It's uncomfortable, which explains why she refuses to sit. But let me be clear, there are no signs of trauma. None." Sarah's knees nearly gave out with relief. She gripped the edge of the bed for support, tears spilling down her cheeks. "So she wasn't—" Dr. Wilson shook her head. "No, this is irritation, most likely caused by friction from new clothing combined with heat and moisture. Denim especially can cause this reaction." Sarah's mind raced back to Friday evening when she had given Emily the new outfit, sparkly butterfly jeans and the yellow rainbow shirt. Emily had worn them proudly to the zoo. Sarah covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, her new clothes. I thought she'd love them." Daniels wasn't satisfied yet. He had seen too many cases that looked simple on the surface, only to uncover something darker beneath. "Doctor, you're certain there's no other cause?" Dr. Wilson met his gaze firmly. "I'm certain. This is textbook dermatitis. Painful, yes, but nothing criminal." For a moment, tension in the room eased, but then Rivera entered again, his expression troubled. He held out Nathan Taylor's phone. "Sir, you're going to want to see this." Daniels took it, scrolling. Through the gallery, photo after photo of the zoo trip, Emily smiling with her cousins, pointing at animals, feeding goats. But then, abruptly, the trail ended. Every single picture of the giraffe enclosure, the very place Emily had described as scary, was missing. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mr. Taylor claims he took dozens of photos. They're gone." Sarah froze, her stomach twisting with dread. Missing photos, a frightened child, a painful rash, a disturbing drawing. The diagnosis explained the physical pain. But the mystery of what Emily had seen, what she had meant by big and thick, remained unsolved, and now suspicion began to fall squarely on the one person Sarah had trusted most, her brother. Nathan Taylor arrived at the hospital in a rush, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his face etched with confusion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who carried himself with casual confidence. But as soon as he stepped into the waiting area and saw the officers, that confidence cracked. "Where's Emily?" "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice louder than he intended. His eyes darted toward Sarah, who stood protectively in front of her daughter, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of fear, guilt, and suspicion. Daniels rose to meet him, holding his gaze. Mr. Taylor, we'll get to that. But first, we need to ask you a few questions about Sunday. Nathan frowned. Sunday? The zoo? What about it? Rivera pulled out a small notepad. You took Emily and your children, correct? Of course, Nathan said, sounding almost insulted. Sarah was working a double. I take them all the time. We went to the zoo, we got ice cream, we came home. That's it. What's this about? Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. Emily came to school this morning in pain, Nathan. She said it hurt to sit. She told her teacher something was big and thick and scary, and then she drew a picture so disturbing that the police had to be called. Now tell me, what happened while she was with you? Nathan blinked, shock washing over his face. What? No, Sarah, I would never... Daniels cut him off. We've reviewed your phone. Dozens of pictures are missing, specifically from the giraffe enclosure. Care to explain why? Color drained from Nathan's face. His mouth opened, then closed again, as though the question had physically knocked the breath from him. Missing? What are you talking about? I took plenty of photos. They're not there, Rivera said firmly. Did you delete them? No. Nathan's voice cracked. Why would I delete them? I showed Emily the giraffes, that's all. They got close to the fence. She got scared. I put my phone back in my pocket because she was crying. Maybe I forgot to save the pictures. I don't know. Sarah's eyes narrowed, suspicion burning through her. For years, she had trusted her brother without question. But now, with Emily clinging to her side and a drawing that looked more like a nightmare than a child's scribble, doubt cut deep. Emily, she whispered, crouching to her daughter's level. Sweetheart, can you tell Mommy what happened with Uncle Nathan at the zoo? The little girl's eyes welled up with tears. She shook her head, burying her face against her mother's shoulder. Daniels crouched low too, his voice gentle. Emily, you're not in trouble. You're safe here. Can you tell us what you saw? You said something was big and thick. What was it? Emily hesitated. Her small voice cracked. It came close. It looked at me. I thought it was going to get me. The room fell silent. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances. Daniels kept his tone calm. Sweetheart, what was it? Can you tell us what you saw? Emily sniffled. Her hands curled into fists, and then she whispered a single word. Giraffe. A stunned silence hung in the air. For a moment the weight in the room shifted, confusion replacing fear. Nathan exhaled sharply, almost laughing with relief. Yes, the giraffes! That's what scared her. They came right up to the railing. She screamed. I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop crying. That's why I didn't take more pictures. That's all it was. Sarah's body sagged with relief and guilt all at once. Her daughter hadn't been assaulted. She hadn't been hurt by someone she trusted. She had simply been terrified by something enormous, unfamiliar, and overwhelming. But Daniels wasn't ready to close the case so easily. He leaned closer. Emily, when you said it was big and thick and scary, you meant the giraffe's tongue. Emily nodded quickly, her face still pale with fear. It was black and long, and it licked the fence. I thought it was going to lick me. I didn't want to sit because it still felt gross. Nathan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Oh my God! She was scared of the giraffe. That's all this was. Sarah clutched Emily tightly, kissing the top of her head over and over. Relief flooded her, but so did shame. She had doubted her brother. She had doubted herself. And her daughter, too young to explain her fear clearly, had been caught in the middle of something far bigger than she understood. The officers exchanged a long look. Daniels finally stood, tucking his notebook away. It seems we have our answer. Miscommunication, a terrifying experience for a little girl, but nothing criminal. Sarah let out a sob of relief, holding Emily even tighter. It's okay, baby. You're safe. Mommy's here. And for the first time since that morning, Emily managed a small, trembling smile. The hospital room grew quieter after Emily's frightened confession. For the first time in hours, the panic that had gripped everyone began to loosen its hold. The word giraffe echoed in Sarah's mind again and again, almost surreal in its simplicity. Something so innocent, an animal behind a fence, had created a storm of fear, suspicion, and heartbreak. Sarah knelt on the floor, clutching her daughter, her tears spilling freely. "Oh, Emily, my baby girl, I'm so sorry. I should have known you were just scared. I should have been there to hold your hand." Emily buried her face against her mother's chest. "It was so big, Mommy. It looked at me like it was going to eat me. I didn't want to sit down after that. I kept remembering it." Sarah kissed her hair again and again, whispering, "It's okay now, you're safe. It was just an animal. It can't hurt you." Across the room, Nathan slumped into a chair, his face pale and exhausted. He ran his hands down his face and let out a shaky breath. "I thought she was fine. I thought the zoo would be fun. She cried, but I didn't realize how much it scared her. I never imagined it would turn into this." His voice cracked. "Sarah, you actually thought You thought I hurt her?" Sarah turned toward him, guilt heavy in her chest. "Nathan, you don't know what it was like seeing that drawing, hearing the police talk about evidence. I wanted to believe in you. But when it's your child, and she's crying, and you don't have answers, you think the worst. You have to." Nathan's jaw tightened. He looked away, staring at the sterile hospital wall. "I would never harm her, never. She's like one of my own. All I wanted was to give her a fun day out. Instead, I feel like I failed her. And I failed you." The weight of his words hung heavy between them. For the first time, Sarah saw her brother not as the confident caretaker who had always stepped in when she was working late shifts, but as a man who had been blindsided, accused, and nearly broken by something completely out of his control. Officer Daniels closed his notebook and cleared his throat. "Ms. Taylor, Mr. Taylor, we'll be closing this case as non-criminal, but let me say something important." His voice softened, but carried authority. "This was a misunderstanding, but it shows how easily fear and miscommunication can spiral. Emily's teacher did exactly what she should have. She took the child seriously. She called for help, and as painful as this was, that's the system working as it should. No one failed here." Mrs. Henderson, who had been waiting silently in the hallway, stepped inside. Her eyes were red, her face lined with worry. She crossed the room slowly, kneeling beside Emily with a tenderness that only years of teaching had refined. "You were very brave today, Emily," she said softly. "You used your words and your picture to tell us you were scared. That's what brave girls do." Emily looked up at her teacher with shy eyes. "You cried," she whispered. Mrs. Henderson smiled through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart, because I care about you, and because I never want you to feel afraid. But now I'm smiling too because you're safe." Sarah reached out, squeezing the teacher's hand. "Thank you for believing her, for protecting her." "I don't even know how to thank you enough." Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "Just promise me this. Never dismiss her voice, even if it's confusing, even if it doesn't make sense. Children tell the truth in their own way, and it's our job to listen." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "I promise." The room was quiet for a long time, each person processing the whirlwind of emotions that had carried them from terror to relief in the span of a single day. The fear was real, the pain was real, but so was the love that bound them together, pulling them through the storm. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long golden beams through the hospital windows. Life went on. Cars moved along the streets, children laughed in the playground across the way, and the world seemed almost indifferent to the life-altering ordeal that had just unfolded behind those walls. But for Sarah, for Emily, for Nathan, and for Mrs. Henderson, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Sometimes the scariest stories don't come from monsters or villains. Sometimes they come from a child's fear, a fear so real that it shakes every adult around them. And while this story ended without tragedy, it's a powerful reminder. Listen to children. Believe them. Their words may be small, their drawings may be crude, but hidden inside them can be truths we cannot afford to ignore. The hospital visit was over, but the tension lingered like a shadow that refused to lift. Emily had calmed enough to drift off to sleep in her mother's arms, her breathing soft and steady. But for Sarah and Nathan, the storm had only shifted. It hadn't passed. They sat across from each other in the quiet waiting area, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The officers had left. Dr. Wilson had gone to finish her rounds. The chaos had ended, but the silence between them was deafening. Sarah looked down at her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Emily stirred slightly, clutching her mother's sleeve even in her sleep. That small gesture cut Sarah to her core. Finally, Nathan broke the silence. His voice was low, ragged, and heavy with hurt. "Do you know what it felt like, Sarah? Walking into that hospital and seeing cops waiting for me? Seeing the way you looked at me, like I was a monster." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. "Nathan, I didn't want to believe it. God, I didn't. But what was I supposed to think? My little girl was crying in pain, and she drew something no 6-year-old should draw. Do you think I had the luxury of doubting her? I've taken care of Emily since she was born," Nathan shot back, his voice cracking. "Every time you pulled a double shift, every time you needed help, who was there? Me. And in 1 second, all that trust was gone. Just like that." Sarah's throat tightened. His words hit hard, because they were true. Nathan had been her, rock more times than she could count. He had been Emily's second father, while her real one was away serving overseas. She wanted to argue, but guilt anchored her silence. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered finally. "When your child says she's hurting, when she looks terrified, you don't stop to make a list of suspects. You act. And I was so scared, Nathan. More scared than I've ever been in my life." Nathan leaned back in his chair, running his hands over his face. His voice broke. "Do you know what it does to a man? Hearing his own sister. Thinks he's capable of that. I would die before I let anyone hurt her. But for a few hours you thought it was me." Sarah's tears spilled freely now. She hugged Emily closer, her voice barely audible. "I thought I was protecting her. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean—" Her words trailed off into silence. Nathan looked at her, his jaw tight, but his eyes softened slightly as he watched Emily sleep in her mother's arms. He exhaled slowly. "She's all that matters. I can live with your doubt. I can live with the police questioning me. But if she ever looks at me with fear in her eyes, if she ever thinks I'm the reason she's not safe, I don't think I could live with that." Sarah swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "She doesn't think that, Nathan. She loves you. She was just scared of something she couldn't explain, and I jumped to the worst conclusion." For a moment, Nathan looked away, his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. "Maybe we both need to learn something from this. You to trust me, and me to pay closer attention. Because I should have seen it. I should have known how scared she was at that zoo. I brushed it off. I thought she'd get over it. But she didn't. And look what it turned into." Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "So we both failed her?" Nathan shook his head firmly. "No. Because in the end, she told the truth. She spoke up, and you listened. And the teacher listened. That's what saved her, even if it tore us apart for a few hours." The weight in the room shifted again. For the first time since that morning, Sarah felt the faintest glimmer of peace. Maybe trust could be rebuilt. Maybe this was a scar they would carry together. But scars could heal. Emily stirred in her arms, her small voice whispering in her sleep. "No giraffe, no giraffe." Sarah kissed the top of her head. Shh, baby. No giraffes. You're safe. Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was softer now, gentler. She'll probably have nightmares for a while. Maybe even fears we don't understand. But we'll get her through it. Together. Sarah met his eyes and nodded. Together. And though the wound of mistrust still lingered, in that moment they both knew one thing was certain. Emily's safety, her healing, and her future would always come first. The next morning, Pinewood Elementary didn't feel like the same school. News of the police arriving with sirens blaring had already spread through the hallways like wildfire. Children may not always understand the details, but they notice when adults are scared. They notice when teachers whisper in hushed tones. And they notice when one of their classmates doesn't come back to class right away. By the time Emily returned to school later in the week, escorted gently by her mother, the other children stared. Some asked questions outright. Why did the police come? Did you get hurt? While others just watched in silence, their curiosity unspoken but heavy in the air. Mrs. Henderson was ready. She greeted Emily with the same warmth as always, gently guiding her into the classroom. Everyone, she said in her calm but firm teacher's voice. Emily had a hard time, but she's doing much better now. We're happy she's here with us again, and we're all going to help her feel safe. The students nodded, some shyly, some with eager smiles. A few of the girls reached out to hold Emily's hand during circle time. Slowly, the tension began to fade, but for the adults, the questions lingered. At pickup time, parents gathered in small clusters by the front gate, their voices low but urgent. I heard the police came. Was there really an emergency in the classroom? Is it safe here? Principal Morgan had anticipated this. She stood before them with measured authority, her hands clasped. I know many of you are concerned about what happened earlier this week. What I can tell you is that our staff acted quickly and appropriately when a child expressed distress. The matter was investigated, and there was no threat to student safety. But please understand, when a child signals that something is wrong, we must always take it seriously. That is our responsibility, and I stand by it completely. Some parents nodded in agreement. Others still looked uneasy, but one mother raised her hand, her voice shaking with emotion. I'm glad the teacher acted. I would want the same for my own child. If something scared them, I'd rather overreact than ignore. The words rippled through the crowd. Slowly, the murmurs of doubt gave way to reluctant understanding. Later that week, at a faculty meeting, Mrs. Henderson shared her own perspective with the other teachers. She spoke quietly, but with a conviction that came from lived experience. When Emily handed me that drawing, I'll be honest, I broke down. I thought the worst, and calling 911 was the hardest thing I've ever done in my career. But I'd do it again, because I'd rather cry over a misunderstanding than stay silent and risk a child's safety. The room was still. Many teachers nodded. Some wiped their eyes. It was a reminder that their jobs were about more than math lessons and spelling tests. They were guardians, protectors, and sometimes the only voice a child had when something was wrong. At church the following Sunday, Sarah felt the weight of community eyes on her. Some offered hugs, others whispered questions she didn't want to answer. But one older woman, a grandmother who had raised 6 children of her own, pulled her aside and squeezed her hand. You did what any mother would do, she said gently. You listened to your child. That's all that matters. Don't carry shame for protecting her. Sarah blinked back tears. For the first time since that terrifying day, she began to let go of the guilt that had been clinging to her. And Emily. She slowly returned to her routine. She still refused to sit on the carpet during story time for a few days, choosing instead to perch carefully on a pillow. She still flinched when her classmates talked about animals with long tongues. But with time, patience, and gentle reassurance, she laughed again. She raised her hand to answer questions. She even colored new drawings, this time of flowers, rainbows, and smiling faces. The shadow of fear hadn't disappeared overnight, but in its place, a deeper lesson had taken root in the hearts of everyone who knew her. When a child speaks, even if it seems confusing, even if it sounds impossible, listen. Because their world is different from ours, and their fears are real to them, even when the truth is far simpler than we first believe. Sometimes the most powerful stories don't come from criminals, villains, or strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes they come from a child's fear, innocent, pure, and unfiltered. Emily's story reminds us of something that too many adults forget. Children don't always have the words to explain what scares them. They don't sit us down with logical arguments or neat timelines. Instead, they say fragments of thoughts. They whisper words that don't always make sense. They cry. They draw. They act out in ways that can seem strange to grown-ups. And yet, behind those small actions can hide enormous truths. Emily wasn't in danger. She hadn't been harmed. But in her 6-year-old world, the towering presence of a giraffe, its massive tongue reaching out toward her, was terrifying enough to haunt her through the next day. She couldn't explain it in adult language. So she explained it in the only way she knew how, through her refusal to sit, through her whispered words, through a drawing that shook her teacher to her core. What's extraordinary about this story is not just the misunderstanding, it's the chain of adults who chose to listen. Mrs. Henderson didn't dismiss Emily's fear. She didn't say, "Sit down, you're fine." She noticed. She asked questions, and when the answers terrified her, she acted. She made the hardest call a teacher can make. She called 911. The police didn't dismiss the report either. They came, they investigated, they took every word seriously, and Sarah, though her heart nearly broke under the weight of suspicion and fear, did the same. She believed her daughter. She protected her, even when it meant doubting her own brother. And in the end, the truth wasn't criminal. It wasn't violent. It wasn't the horror they all feared. But the fact that everyone listened, that everyone treated Emily's words with respect, meant that if it had been something darker, she would have been protected. That is the lesson. Children may not always tell their truths clearly, but they always tell them in some way. It's up to us, the parents, the teachers, the caretakers, to slow down and hear it. Even when it's messy, even when it's confusing, even when it turns out to be something as simple as a giraffe's tongue. Because for a child, that fear was real, and when we listen, when we take them seriously, we send a powerful message. Your voice matters. Your feelings matter. You matter. That message stays with a child long after the fear fades. It shapes how safe they feel in the world. It shapes whether they trust adults with their secrets. And it shapes whether they grow up believing their own voice has power. So the next time a child says, "I'm scared," don't brush it off. Ask why. Ask gently. Ask patiently. You may uncover nothing more than a fear of shadows or a tall animal behind a fence. But you might also uncover something that saves them. And even if it's just a giraffe, what you'll have given them is far greater than relief. You'll have given them proof that the adults around them listen, that they are safe, and that's something no child should ever doubt. And that's the story of the little girl who refused to sit at school, drew something that broke her teacher's heart, and ended up teaching everyone around her a lesson about listening, love, and fear. Emily's story could have gone in 100 directions. For hours, people thought the worst. But in the end, it was just a frightened child trying to explain the only way she knew how, and maybe that's the biggest lesson here. Sometimes what terrifies us isn't danger itself, but the way we interpret fear. For a 6-year-old, a giraffe's tongue felt like the end of the world. For adults, her words sounded like tragedy. Both were real, both were valid, and both remind us how powerful communication, or the lack of it, can be. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think? Did Emily's teacher do the right thing by calling 911 immediately? Or do you think it was an overreaction? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if this story made you think, if it pulled you in, or if it even made your heart race a little, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps push this video to more people. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell, because I share stories like this every week. Stories that shock, surprise, and sometimes even inspire. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are only scary because of the way we see them. Listen closely, believe children, and never forget, their voices might just be the most important ones in the room. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.